Hello, everyone. Welcome to Apologia Live, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians live from, as always, from Apologia Studios here in lovely Nova Scotia, Canada. But today we have the extra bonus treat of taking the look at the claims of Christians, and the Christian will be here to add to the claims. So today we are chatting with Dr. Neil Shenvi. Neil, welcome to the channel and welcome to the show.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
for
much for
inviting me.
Yeah. For those of who aren't familiar with you, let me just first remind everyone that on my main channel, where I'm a cartoon, about a month ago, I want to say, I put out a video regarding Neil's interview with Dr. Sean McDowell. And they were presenting many different things as from his book, but one of the things was the argument that truth-seeking is evidence for God. I don't think he would say it proves God. I think he would say it's evidence for God. And I responded to that. And that got some great response from a lot of you. And obviously there was places that there were gaps to fill in and responses to make. And Neil was kind enough to come on. And instead of having back and forth on YouTube, we're just going to talk it out and see where we can come together. But Dr. Shenvi, for those who in my audience who don't know who you are, why don't you tell them a little bit about your background?
Sure. So well, how far back do you want me to go? So I grew
Well,
up
let's
in.
go to your conversion and going forward from there.
Sure. So I did not grow up in a Christian household. I kind of was spiritual but not religious. But I became a Christian in graduate school at UC Berkeley through a variety of things, through knowing my future wife, Christina, who was a Christian, through reading C.S. Lewis, through meeting just educated Christians at the church that I was attending. So I got my PhD at UC Berkeley in theoretical chemistry, not experimental chemistry. Don't think Walter White in Breaking Bad. Think who's the guy Sheldon on The Big Bang
Sheldon, you're
Theory?
more closer to Sheldon.
That's exactly right. And I have
Yeah,
not
all
seen the
right.
show, to be clear, but I've heard from my colleagues that that's what we do. So,
Okay.
yeah. Or the other analogy I use is Russell Crowe's character in A Beautiful Mind with all the
Oh,
equations,
love
right?
that
He's
film.
writing on so I used to do that all the time. I'd scroll equations, not on my window, but anyway. But that's my background. I did postdocs at Yale and Duke, and now I'm living in Durham, North Carolina, and I homeschool my kids now.
Excellent. And what prompted all this was you're also an author.
Mm-hmm.
Or I shouldn't say, I think your conversion probably prompted all this into your deep thinking into all these matters. But you recently put out a book and it's called Why Believe? And there's a subtitle I've forgotten. Why don't you tell us a bit about the book?
Yeah, it's called Why Believe, a Reasoned Approach to Christianity. So it came out 2 months ago almost.
And at the time when I made the video, it wasn't available to me, but I have since acquired a copy. And to be clear with everyone, I've read chapter 5, which is what we're talking about today. I am anxious to read the rest because it is well written, and there are so many topics upon which we overlap. So if this conversations go well, who knows? Maybe there could be future conversations about resurrections and evolution and all those kind of things. But today we're going to stick to our original plan topic, and that is your hypothesis regarding truth and truth seeking, and whether that is actually in and of itself some evidence toward God. Would it be appropriate for me to throw up the syllogism, or how do we want to
No,
start?
sure. So why don't you introduce the syllogism? It's from my
Okay.
book, and then I will go through. So I identified 8 independent objections that you raised to this argument in your video from last month. So I'll go through the 8 objections, and we can go through them one at a time.
Perfect. So, premise 1, if a truth-loving God does not exist, then truth is not intrinsically good, and truth-seeking is not morally obligatory. Premise 2, truth is intrinsically good, and truth-seeking is morally obligatory. Therefore, the conclusion, a truth-loving God exists. Now, I think when you were on the stream, you actually put premise 1 in more of a non-double negative fashion, but this is the version from the book, so let's go with that.
Yeah. And so So I think in the video, you pointed out that Sean misspoke, and he said that we're arguing about whether this argument is valid and sound. And I think we agree that it is valid, meaning
Yes,
that if the premises are true, then the conclusion follows logically. That's all we mean by valid. So I think we agree
correct.
it's valid. But of
Yeah,
course, we
we
don't
agree.
agree that it's sound, meaning that we
No.
disagree on whether the premises are actually true. So we're
Yeah,
debating whether the premises are true. Okay, so but I think we agree it's valid at least. At least we're there.
exactly. Yeah, no, I think we're there. So it sounds like the format we're going to take is that you're going to interview yourself on this based on the questions that I posed before. So this is excellent for me. I just get to sit back and listen.
Well, no. I'm just gonna list the objections, and then
Oh,
we
I
can
see. Well, list
talk
the
about
objections.
them. So
Okay,
I'm
sounds
not
good.
gonna rebut them. I'll just hear so you can tell me, did I leave anything out? So I listened
Oh, gotcha.
carefully
Okay, sounds
many
good.
times to the video.
Okay,
So if I
perfect.
don't mention one of your objections, then you should say, "Oh, you missed this one." Okay, so let me go through this. So number one, and this is one I would have just kind of skipped quickly over this, but a lot of the YouTube comments were really big on this being a major obstacle. So the first objection that I thought was most prominent was I call this argument the transcendental moral argument. It's a kind of moral argument, and it has to do with truth, and so I called it the transcendental moral argument.
Right.
But first objection, number one, the transcendental moral argument engages in begging the question. That's number one. Number
Yep.
two, we'll go back to this, but I want to just name the things. Objection number
Sure.
two, premise one is meaningless. And you say that premise one is meaningless at 25. I have timestamps if you guys want to see it.
Yep.
Objection number three, nothing is unconditionally obligatory. So that's number three. Nothing is
Yep.
unconditionally obligatory. Number four, thinking something is important doesn't mean you believe it's unconditionally an obligation. That's number four.
Yep.
So thinking something's important or helpful or really deeply caring about it does not mean you believe it's an unconditional obligation. Number five, we have people don't actually seek the truth in practice. They often don't seek the truth. Number six, intuition is untrustworthy. So you can't simply appeal to intuition because it's not trustworthy.
Okay.
And you said, for example, I don't understand why theists are so enamored with intuition. At timestamp 38. I'm just making these up. You guys don't trust me.
This is all good. Let's get.
No, it's for you listening.
Put me to the fire. This is good.
Yeah. And then number seven, short-term individual happiness is not identical to human flourishing. So you say personal happiness is not human flourishing. This is a huge mistake on Neil's part. And then finally, eighth, you haven't explained to me, I haven't explained why we are obligated to seek some truths, but not all truths. I make a distinction between trivial truths and then truths that are important. So where's the distinction? Where's the explanation of that? So those are the 8 objections. Did I miss any? I try to be careful and get all of them.
Yeah, I think probably everything that I object to is in there in general. I mean, I would say for me the key here is to can we in any way so premise one I think is less interesting if we don't agree to premise two, and that's kind of why I focus on premise two. I think you would agree with that, that premise one is less interesting.
Yeah, I just had a comment here. So you said premise 2 fails, so premise 1 is meaningless. I think you just misspoke there. I think you meant it's irrelevant. If we deny premise 2,
yes, I would.
Yeah,
I feel like it's within this
discussion.
Within the discussion, it may be trivially true, but it doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, it's just meaningless means something like it literally means nothing. It means like Lorem ipsum brillig cough splat computer. Like,
fair enough. And my old graphic arts days tells me that that's what you paste in when you're just trying to fill in.
There you go. Right. So it's not meaningless. It has you can read it and say, well, I just disagree. But it's not relevant. If you deny premise 2, then who cares whether premise 1 is? It's just irrelevant. So yeah, that's fine. I just
so we've come to 2 portions of agreement that it's valid and that there is actual coherent meaning in premise 1.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So the big one that I saw on the comments on your channel was the idea that it's begging the question. So maybe dozens or hundreds of commenters here, commented like this or liked it. So I want to address the question: is this argument begging the question? Now, again, you correctly said begging the question is assuming the conclusion as part of the premises. So you're
Yep.
smuggling the conclusion into a premise. So that's begging the question. So I have timestamps of you, and I agree. It's if you look at the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, if you beg the question, it means that you're presupposing, you're smuggling in the conclusion of the argument is smuggled into one of the premises. So that's
Yep.
what begging the question means. Okay. So here I think that's not the case. And so, for example, and this is actually easy for us because we have two premises and a conclusion.
Sure.
So either the conclusion, a truth-loving God exists, is being smuggled into premise 1 or premise 2. That's what must be one of those two.
Yep.
And since I think we agree that premise 1, we agree on that that's true, or if it's maybe you don't, I don't know. But the question would be then, okay, which premise of 1 or 2 is assuming that a truth-loving God exists? That's a conclusion, because I don't think either premise assumes that.
Well, yeah. So where I think it gets smuggled in, and you can tell me if this is wrong, is in your definition of morality. So when you say truth seeking is morally obligatory, in the conversation with Sean, and I'm very happy to be wrong about this, it seemed like you were both leaning towards a definition of morality that meant something along the lines of corresponding to God's will or corresponding to God's commands. And
Sure.
if that is the definition of morality that you are using, and so we can discuss about whether that I was accurate in that objection or not, but that's for me where I think it's getting smuggled in. If you define morality as having to do with God, then you are smuggling in God in premise 2.
Sure.
Is that
So
fair at all?
yeah, so I think that's a mistake, because I think you can say, for example, an atheist could affirm premise 2 because they might understand morally differently than I do. And they'd say, but I agree with premise 2. I think it is morally obligatory for us to seek the truth, right? For other reasons that have nothing to do with God, because I'm an atheist. And they deny premise 1 then. But it wouldn't be in there. So for example, I mean, I made a parallel argument.
Okay.
So I agree. For me personally, I see that moral good and evil, right and wrong, exist in relationship to God. Right, what's right and wrong is what God commands. What's good is corresponding to God's character. But an atheist doesn't have to affirm that. They can say, no, you're totally wrong about morality. Sam Harris might say, no, good and evil are grounded in the flourishing of humans or sentient creatures, say. Peter Singer might go beyond that. So there are other atheists who would say, no, we affirm that morality exists apart from God, totally apart from God. And then they could conceivably affirm premise 2. So then that definitionally, if they're not begging the question, the argument isn't, because they can affirm premise 2. Yeah.
Get that.
Okay.
I would say, though, that the way you and Sean were presenting it, I guess you would agree, if your definition of morality contains God, then it is smuggling God in.
Well, so if the premise said, if truth seeking is commanded by God, if that were in premise 2, I don't totally agree, but it doesn't say that. I was very careful to separate those two. That's why you have two premises. if it's just one premise and it says, truth seeking is commanded by God, conclusion God exists, well, that would be begging the question. Totally agreed. But the whole point of having two premises is so that an atheist totally honestly and truthfully could say, no, I reject premise 1 and affirm premise 2, or vice versa. So that's open to the atheist to do either. So again, that's why it's not begging the question. So
Okay.
Here's a simple analogy, a silly analogy I came up with. Is funny. Imagine that I'm the chief legal officer in a major corporation, and the CEO is supposedly this brilliant recluse. No one's ever seen him. So one day I'm the chief officer of this firm, and my job is to investigate things. And I get a letter on my desk that says, investigate whether the CEO even exists. So some guy in my office says, well, here's an argument. Premise 1, if the CEO doesn't exist, then you have no obligation to investigate his existence. Premise 2, you are obligated to investigate, and therefore, conclusion, the CEO exists. Now, it's possible for me to reject premise 1 or premise 2 and deny that a CEO exists. That argument's not begging the question. For example, I could say, no, if the CEO doesn't exist, then you have no obligation, because only the CEO has the power to obligate you to investigate this issue. Or I could say, no, actually, the vice president could also command you and you're obligated. It's another way to ground that obligation.
Gotcha.
But it's not begging the question. What I interpret that letter to be appealing to is irrelevant to this begging the question. So the only point is that for the people in your chat who really thought this was begging the question. I just don't think it is. And
Okay.
again, I'm not saying you should accept that reasoning. Just saying
Sure.
it's not this particular fallacy.
Okay, but so in order to avoid begging the question, we'll agree for the rest of our discussion that what we talk about as morality will not involve God in any way.
Well, not
So is that
necessarily. So again, for me, that's like I say, yeah, morality is grounded in God's character and his commands. But say Sam Harris would be on here being like, no, you're wrong, Neil. It exists. Morality exists. You can totally talk
But
about
would you
good
not,
and evil.
if we don't have the same definition of morality, how are we even having the same conversation?
So again, you can talk about this. I could say, do you believe in water? Yes, I believe in water. Do you, Paul? We both believe in water. It's a thing we can
Yes.
point to. It's water. But then, well, what is water? Well, if I'm sort of a medieval alchemist, I might be like, well, water is one of the four elements. And it was as a chemist today might be, no, it's H2O, it's a molecule, it's a collection of. But the point is, we differ. Maybe someone might say, I'm a big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's what a spiritual. I don't know. But the point is, we all agree water exists. What we're defining it to be, what its essence is, we disagree on. So we can disagree on the essence of water, right? What's grounded in, but we wouldn't disagree that it exists, and you can point to it and say, well, that's water. So again, I would say,
if we don't agree on the definition, like the question here is about moral obligations, and if we are not agreeing that, like, I don't think that these are different degrees of looking at the elephant via the tail in the trunk. Like, for me, if I go with like Sam Harris's definition of morality, which was principles of behaviors that allow for people to flourish.
Yeah, sure.
And you are not using the same definition we're talking, how are we going to avoid talking past each other?
So I think we're asking the question, where does it come from? Like, where does morality get? And so I'm saying I think morality comes from God in some sense. It's and all theists basically would say, even deists would say it's connected to God in some sense. It's either his character or his commands, and an atheist might say, well, no, there's no God. So it's if I believe in morality, it's something else. It refers to human flourishing. It refers to our promises we've made. There are a lot of philosophers, but if you look at professional philosophers, the moral realists who believe that morality expresses propositions that are true or false, they outnumber anti-realists 2-1. So it's like most philosophers, even non-theists, would say no, morality is a thing. It's a real thing. We disagree on where it's grounded. So
but morality. But if you define it as having to do with flourishing, then it's absolutely a thing.
Well, that's my point. So I wouldn't.
So are you and I agreeing that then, just for the sake of that, morality has to do with flourishing?
No, I wouldn't. I said you can. It makes sense to say it's a thing. It's like saying I can say water is a thing, but I think it's one of the four elements. I think it's a spiritual essence. Someone else say no, I think it's just molecules.
But then we're actually pointing to the same thing and just describing attributes in this.
We're saying what is its essence? Where is it coming from? We disagree on that. We don't disagree that it exists. That's the difference. So
no, but it's about as meaningful if we both said that we both think unicorns exist. But I say that you say that unicorns are a horse with a horn on the head, and I think it's a dog with a horn on its head. Then we're both saying unicorns exist, but that's meaningless because we're just pointing to the same word to point to different objects.
So I think if you ask something like, and this is partly getting into, I think, what we're going to talk about later, but I think that when an atheist or a Christian or a Buddhist, when they point to some action, like some action that most people agree on, like murder, and say that's evil, or compassion, that's good, there's not confusion in our minds. Well, and there's broad agreement. Actually, I'll point this out. Steven Pinker, in his book The Blank Slate, has an appendix where he lists human universals across culture, across history. They're like over 100 of there's things that you find in every culture. But one of those, I have a page number here somewhere, but some of the things he lists across culture throughout all human history are things like right and wrong, good and evil, certain prohibitions against murder and rape. These are human universals. There are other random things too, like division of labor, and I don't remember what else. The point is that we're not at the state where like some people are literally saying, no, murder is good. Other people are saying murder is bad. We all recognize there is this thing called good. There's a thing called evil. We don't know but we even agree on roughly what is good and evil, roughly. We just don't know what's it pointing to, what's behind it. So I don't think we're at the level of like, well, you think a unicorn's a horse with a horn, and I think a unicorn is like a galaxy. We're not
Uh,
there. We're agreeing largely on what these things are.
sure, but or is this feels to me more like we're saying, hey, we can say, hey, person A is steak good, and
Mhm.
person B A agrees, and person B also agrees, but one is thinking of foods that are delicious, and one is thinking of foods that have protein, and they both happen to say that foods are good, but that doesn't tell you anything about what they were, what they were
Yeah,
thinking. So go ahead.
the analogy would be something like, so I think the position that you espouse, this more idea that, well, all of these values like good and bad are a function of your own goals and desires. It goes back to think David Hume. The idea that there's no intrinsically good but I think that, again, Sam Harris would disagree and would say, no, 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 no. When you say that murder is bad, you're not merely saying it's bad relative to my own desires. Whereas a mass murderer might be like, no, it's good. And they're right too, because they like mass murder. So,
Well, the way Sam gets away from that being relative is because he gives a definition of
right. Yeah.
morality, that the definition of morality has flourishing in the definition.
But his point, the point is that there is he's trying to explain this. Again, I would say it is an intuition that we all universally have as humans, that some things are good and bad. There's this category, how to explain it. Whereas in Hume, it was basically, I was just saying, throwing away the category and saying, no, you're just a matter of preference and taste. And so here, all I'm saying here is that I think that I think actually that you're consistent in saying I reject premise 2 because it's not morally obligatory in either the Sam Harris or the Neil
Mhm.
Shenvi or the Derek Parfit or I'm listening atheists here who agree with it. There's this category of morality. You reject that. And I think it's consistent. But I'm saying that me and Sam Harris and Derek Parfit and Eric Weilenberg and other atheists would say, no. We're trying to name the same thing. We're just trying to explain it in different ways. Whereas I think you're saying, no, I reject that. I reject that category of this sort of objective, intrinsic good or evil, which Sam Harris grounds in human flourishing.
Well, because if you go by his definition, then at that point you've agreed to his goals. So when you agree to the goals, just like in a chess game, of course, you can agree what some moves are objectively better than other if the goal is to win the game.
Right. So, but my
when
point
you
is that
agree to Sam's definition, you agree to his goal, and that's why he can say that things are objective, and it makes people confused, I think. But let's look at premise 2 a little bit, and maybe you can try and help me bridge the gap of what. So the first part, truth is intrinsically good.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't. I don't get it.
Yeah,
Can you? And I think one of my objections was that you pointed out, you and Sean in the interview you were doing kept talking about knowledge being preferable, or knowledge, pursuing knowledge, all these things that people like it and do it. And you're right. I kept saying over and over, well, that doesn't mean it's intrinsically good.
Yeah.
So help me bridge that gap.
This is great. So, and there's so much here. I really enjoyed thinking about this. And I have another thought experiment. I'm a theorist, so a lot of what I do is, thinking about analogies that help us understand these issues. And even if, again, I'm not aiming to necessarily convince you. I mean, I hope I do,
Right.
but just to explain where we're coming from. So, here's the illustration. So, I actually agree that being deeply committed to anything, doesn't necessarily mean you think it's intrinsically valuable. So I can be deeply committed to, I don't know, my favorite ice cream and still not think it's intrinsically the best ice cream. But actually, so I'm arguing the converse, which is actually that we all as human beings, we recognize a moral realm, which we just bump into it. We recognize intrinsically things are good and evil, and things are morally obligatory. And then that's why we are deeply committed to them. So here's an illustration that can help me explain. Again, I'm trying to explain where I'm coming from within my worldview as a Christian.
Yep.
And it goes much deeper than that in terms of why
I'll try and be straight on this.
Okay. So imagine that this is actually in my book, actually, page 130. You probably read this analogy to some extent. So imagine that you and I are talking, and I'm like, I don't actually believe in gravity. It's a fabrication of the liberal media and George Soros, and I don't believe in gravity. But we take a trip together to Grand Canyon, and you see me just clutching the guardrails, and my kids are playing near the edge of the canyon. And I'm like, "Hey, kids, get out of the away from the canyon. The warning sign, get away from there." And you kind of scratch your head, and you're like, you sure look like you believe in gravity. And so, are you sure you don't believe in gravity? And I'm like, so I think, so on reflection, my behavior might seem like I believe in gravity, but actually I'm just into following rules. I think society works better when we all follow the rules. There's a sign right there. The sign says, keep away from the edge. So I believe in society being healthy and flourishing. So that's why I'm following the sign's rules. And then we take another trip. We go to a scenic overlook. And again, kids are playing near the edge. I'm gripping the guardrails and yelling at the kids, stay away from the edge. And at one point, I even dropped my wallet off the cliff. And I say, well, I can't go get it. That's against the rules. And you say, wait a minute. You pull me aside. You said, there's no sign here. There's no rule. You can, if you don't believe in gravity, just float down and get the wallet. And I sort of think for a second. I'm like, okay, technically it looks again like I believe in gravity, but I'm just applying a heuristic. A rule of thumb is that I live in society filled with gravity believers, and things work better when we all get along. And so I tend to act as if their rules are there, even if I don't really, maybe this case by case basis. I can't evaluate every single case where I should act like I don't believe in it. I'm just explaining why I act the way I do. At some point, you would be totally justified in saying, you know what, I think you're encountering the same reality that I encounter. Gravity is obviously there, and you don't have the resources to explain that reality. So you're appealing to all these other explanations that are pretty arcane. So again, from my perspective, I'm not arguing this is but as a Christian, this is why we argue confidently and say you're bumping into the same moral realm that all of us bump into. But if you're an atheist, you don't have the resources to explain what those things are. I mean, look, J.L. Mackie was an atheist, and he's an atheist, and he said, moral facts are so weird that they could only be explained if a God was there to create them. And he's an atheist. He's saying, so he's like, well, that's not really exist. But his point was, we're encountering this moral reality. We feel it, we experience it, we act certain ways. But then when you ask someone to think through it, if they're an atheist, they're like, I can't really explain it, so I'll give some other reason I behave the way I do. So that's why
in this scenario, you think that in this scenario, to be clear, I don't believe in gravity. Is that?
Yeah, well, in the same way you'd say, you don't believe in intrinsic value, and you don't believe in objective morality, right? And I'm saying, like the guy who's saying, I don't believe in gravity, but you and the guy who doesn't believe in gravity are both running into this moral realm or this gravitational realm and trying to explain it from within your worldview. And I'm saying you have to step outside of your worldview and say, there's a better explanation, but it goes at the heart of your worldview.
Yeah, no, but so you classified your definition of morality as a better definition. So that's great. Where is the definition of morality is the principles of behavior that allow people to flourish? Where's the gap between that definition and what you are explaining? Where's that gap? What makes your explanation better?
Excellent. Good question. So one answer is that in Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape, in a footnote, he actually makes this offhand remark that, well, you can imagine a moral landscape of, things that promote human flourishing and things that harm human flourishing. You can imagine a universe in which rapists were supremely happy. And in that case, the moral landscape and the human flourishing landscape would come apart. And wait a minute. Philosophically, you can't do that. If you're defining, and he defines morality in terms of happy, human flourishing, but when he admits that actually conceivably they're not the same thing, well, then they can't be identical then. So even he sees there are problems with identifying goodness.
So this is great because this leads into one of the points that I spit out and you echoed back to me, and that is that human flourishing and happiness are not synonymous.
Okay, so you definitely several times said that I'm conflating human happiness and human flourishing. And actually, if you let me find the quotes here. In the book and in actually the interview with Sean, a couple of times I actually did make a distinction between, I pointed out that that happiness is not identical to human flourishing. So for example, I said, darn it, I gotta scroll through this. It's like a 6,000 word document. There we go. So I say, for example, at one point I say, what if we just empirically discover that most human beings and societies just can't deal with an atheistic universe? This is why I'm arguing that sometimes truth seeking can end up making us miserable, but not just individually. Societies might not flourish. I talk about how in the book, actually, no, 2508, I say, atheists will say that truth seeking is good because it might lead to us curing world hunger and curing diseases and get us to colonize distant stars. Again, I'm not thinking just about individual happiness. I'm thinking about societies. I'm thinking about long-term in a millennium, we go colonize Alpha Centauri. So the point here is I'm not saying, well, it makes you sad individually, therefore it's bad. No. I'm saying beyond that, we have to take into account flourishing of entire civilizations in the indefinite future. So yeah,
am I wrong in thinking that you gave at least a few examples though that were of individual happiness?
Oh yeah, definitely. The grandmother thing, absolutely. But that's just if you look at also if you Google just human flourishing, it's used as a catch-all term by philosophers and by psychologists to refer to. It does says happiness definitely, but then things like sense of meaning, social connection. So I didn't. All of that's I think it does. To me, all of that boils down in some sense to like a holistic happiness. If you're just miserable all the time, I don't care if you have a great family and meaning, but you're just utterly tortured. I think it's not flourishing. So, but the point is, I do take a broader view than just, you have the sensual enjoyment, you're flourishing. No. It's more than that.
Okay. But again, because the example you gave to wind it back a little bit for, why your version of morality might be better than mine or more complete or more aligned to truth or however we describe better was that, certain people would have more joy out of raping someone, and now my stream is demonetized, but that's fine. So
that's Sam Harris's view. That's why his view I think is wrong.
And again, I think that is just even for Sam, that's an inconsistent view of the way he presents well-being and human flourishing.
All right, so we agree again that Sam Harris's view is wrong.
No, and I don't. This is one of the things. I don't actually solidly. I'm not lockstep with Sam on everything for sure. Particularly when I think he confuses people when he says that he espouses an objective morality. I don't think he really does. I think he picks a subjective goal and says, well, we all should agree to that goal. Though, so then again, that's Anyway, we're not here to debate Sam.
Okay, there's so much here. But, so go ahead. I'm sorry. Don't interrupt. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it was human flourishing. But one of the things I do agree with him on is, he doesn't unfortunately ever give a great definition, but he does espouse that it has to be this blend of how well an individual does and how well the species is doing, and it's this awkward balance of finding those things. And of course, it all falls also into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know Maslow's out of vogue, but the general hierarchy of needs that, of course, if no one is eating, well, then how we feel about certain things doesn't matter. So flourishing, does have a bit of the hierarchy of needs going upwards, and it's partially because some of these things I don't have to go hunt for my own food. I don't all these kind of things that I can start thinking about theism more than I would 100 years ago. So
I would say Harris's view is deficient. I think for the reasons that we sort of agree on is that he doesn't make a good case. Well, in my mind, it's because he admits openly that morality and human flourishing are not always identical, which in case they can't define one as the other. What I would say for your view, this is actually interesting. So let me step back. One of the things, the other complaints you raised was that that me and Sean are treating our intuition as trustworthy. So this is a great quote. I think it's good. You said, I don't understand why theists are so enamored with intuition. I think this is exactly right. We are enamored of intuition, but again, it makes sense on our worldview because we believe that the universe was created by God, that God made us in his image, and he wants us to know who he is. He wants us to be able to navigate reality and appreciate his creation. So it makes sense that we would give us certain, our intuition isn't infallible, it's not perfect, but we generally trust that our deepest intuitions are reflecting God's reality. However, if I were not a theist, then I would actually be equally skeptical, because evolution does not care about truth ultimately. All it cares about is getting your sex organs in the right place so that you'll reproduce. That's it. Truth
Yes,
takes
and
the
to which I
hindmost.
say amen.
Yeah.
That's
So,
why it's not. That's why I don't think it's an obligation in any stretch that
well,
people seek truth.
but here's if I do. So the objection was, why do you trust your intuition so much? And I said,
Mhm.
well, from a Christian perspective, it makes sense. Why I wouldn't just doubt all my intuition, because I believe that there's a God who sort of actually a guarantor that he created us in his image. And but here's the thing. So if I were an atheist and I said, well, evolution is no guarantee that it cares about truth. All that the evolution cares about is, again, us reproducing and producing
Yep.
offspring. And there are plenty of species, I mean, almost all of them, that have no beliefs at all, true or false.
Mhm.
Bugs don't have beliefs.
Right.
They just live, they thrive, they're outnumber us like a bazillion to one. But here's the thing. My question is this. I agree that as an atheist, you should be skeptical, not doubt all your intuitions, but be skeptical of your intuitions. But then my question is, are you taking that far enough? And so you gave a great example in your talk about how, here's an example of a false belief that actually increases your reproductive survival fitness.
Yep.
So the creature on the African savanna who assumes that every rustling in the bush is a danger and therefore, avoids the predator, he's 90% of the time he's wrong, but 10%
Yep.
of the time he's not dead. So,
Yep.
you know,
Exactly.
so yeah, evolution actually would in almost in some sense could promote false beliefs as long as they increase our fitness. Now, here's the question: if that's the case, then what justification do you have as an atheist then for not taking that out further? So, for example, um, how do you know that circular reasoning is a fallacy? So, so I say the Bible is true because the Bible is true because the Bible is true. That's circular reasoning. So how do you know that's a fallacy? I mean, I think I would just say, well, it's obvious it's a fallacy. You can't you can't use some statement to justify itself. It's circular. Yeah, but how do you know? At some point, I think I would just say, well, it's just obvious. It's intuitive. How do I know that
Right.
a circle can't be square? It's just,
Well, the circle can be a square because of the definition of a circle,
well,
and in
but
terms
again,
of
mhm.
circularity, um, in terms of circularity, that's again, I agree. We all do go back to some base presuppositions, and of course, one of those is that our senses are reliable enough.
Yes, exactly. But so I, as a Christian, I can explain, well, yeah, if my worldview is right, then I should be able to trust things like my intuition, but also my cognitive faculty. When I think, why is circular reasoning false or faulty? It's obviously it's faulty. Well, can I trust what my brain's telling me? Well, yeah. Why? Because God designed my brain. But as an atheist, who's guaranteeing you that your cognitive faculties are reliable? How do you know that you're not living in a matrix? I mean, right? You could be in the matrix and you could be surrounded by
We
wires.
went straight to that, did we?
Yeah, no. But
And
all of
and
those
and
intuitions.
an atheist would say, we can't. We go with the
Yeah.
predictive power that we have, and
But
when
you're predicting things in the matrix. So I'm asking you a question about how
but
do you know
that's
it's
fine
actually.
because that's the reality I have to live in. Whether or not I'm living in the matrix, the only testable predictions I can make are within the matrix. Now, if things started breaking down, like in the matrix where they had the glitchy cat,
Right.
then that would give me reason. The glitchy cat gave them reason to start questioning whether they were doing things. So
So
what
you
is the glitchy cat here for me? Because I don't have this intuition that you have, that that a god is necessary. I feel like morality is entirely explained to my full satisfaction as a survival mechanism,
mm.
and as a result of
So
evolution. My intuition is satiated. My curiosity is satiated. Where's the glitchy cat for me? What am I missing that I should look to be jumping further?
and let me list some of these things that are, again, to me seem like intuitions that are just that you don't have to. I mean, okay. So things like I'm not living in the matrix. How about this? I should only believe claims on the basis of evidence. Like, why do you believe that you should only believe claims on the basis of evidence? I say, well,
That
obviously.
is so. I only believe claims that have sufficient evidence and reasonable predictive power. I think
You
those are
do,
different.
but why should you?
Oh,
Right?
I
And
don't.
there's
So why should? That's a great question. Why should I? If I want, if I want to live in a way that corresponds to that
but
truth, and if I don't care, I'm under no obligation to
no, no.
care.
So I'm not asking about obligation right now. I'm just asking, why do you think that following the evidence is going to help you live in reality? You assume it
Uh,
is.
because accurate accurate information gives better predictions than inaccurate information.
How do you know that?
And I'm
Yeah,
presupposing that the universe is going to
is
operate in a fashion
regular
that is
and
intelligible.
I
Yeah,
so I agree. So
I totally presuppose that. That said, if the world stopped doing that tomorrow, I would stop presupposing it. Right?
right, and so
That's
what
as
about
Go ahead.
when the law of induction is valid? So this idea that things happen in the past one way, and so it worked in the past, like following the
Mhm.
evidence worked in the past, it'll work in the future. So how do you know that's valid?
I don't, but
Right.
I will stop adhering to it when it stops working.
Well, but so again, that goes back because if you have evidence that stops working, but why do you think evidence is going to lead you to true beliefs? The point is here, all of those beliefs, again, I would just say, well, I believe all those things intuitively. They're just, and you say, well, I presuppose them, but I'm pointing out this. I'm presupposing things that are natural and obviously true on my worldview. You're presupposing things that may or may not even be true on your worldview, right? So if my worldview happens to be true, then you're like, well, obviously all those things we're it's it's it makes sense for us to presuppose all those things. But you're
Is
presupposing things that
does
on your worldview may
materialism
not be true. Yeah.
not imply uniformitarianism?
Oh no, no. I actually this is one of Bertrand Russell has a big hand wringing question of like he asked, how do you know that the world wasn't created? I forget, I think it was 10 seconds ago. The
Oh,
atheist
the
had
last
actually the last
Thursdayism or
Thursdayism,
whatever.
right?
Yeah.
That was Bertrand Russell. Actually, he's a famous atheist, and he points out and actually he criticizes the whole induction thing. It's like, how can you assume induction is going to work? Well, it worked in the past. He's like, that's induction. You can't use induction. It's circular reasoning. So the point is, all of these, and then you say, what's the glitch in the matrix? What if
Mhm.
one of the glitches is the fact that you have all these presuppositions stacked on presuppositions that really can't be justified within your own worldview, but can be justified from a different worldview? So anyway, all I'm pointing out is,
So,
yeah, okay.
well, my they continue to be they continue to provide utility for my survival and flourishing, right?
Well, again, so you think, because you're assuming that your brain can detect when you're surviving. You can assume that I can tell when I'm flourishing. I can tell when I'm living a live reality. I can tell when the evidence makes sense. All you're assuming all these things about your accurate perception of reality, which I think if I were an atheist, I begin to doubt. How can I? How can I know that how can I know that I'm not just totally insane right now? I'm living in an asylum somewhere and just imagining this nice conversation we're having. I
While
don't
those
know.
things are true, I don't understand how that is inconsistent from with materialism. For example, like if I just assume that the universe operates under certain laws and just will continue to operate that way, I don't see how it's inconsistent. How suddenly some doubt about whether
So,
that
so
reflects a greater reality is a
there's
problem.
so it's not inconsistent. At least I'm not arguing that right now. It's not inconsistent, but I'd say there's a difference between something being inconsistent and something that you can be skeptical of. I think I'd be skeptical of these ideas. I wouldn't say, oh, they're clearly false. Not, as
Okay.
the definition, as an atheist, I'd be like, well, obviously, I'm living in an asylum. I don't know. Maybe I am, but I'd be skeptical. How do I know I'm not? I'd be skeptical. How do I know my brain's working properly? How do I know the
Okay, so
evidence is the best source of truth? Yeah.
but is me not like reading your book and
Mhm.
doing things like acting in a consistent way that is somewhat skeptical of my moral definitions and my what to me seems like full justification. And again, this seeking truth, if I'm seeking truth and in this way, um, is that not me being somewhat skeptical of myself?
I think you have to be I can push it farther. You have to ask yourself, I'm reading these words on a page and thinking about them, but am I really? And am I, Neil, it sounds like he's making a bad argument, but how can I know? Maybe my logic's not functioning properly because there's no God who gave me this logical capacity. So again,
Well, but okay, so you're caring about something that I don't care about, I guess, is what's happening here. Because it's like, well, the only thing that I can go by is my own senses. I don't have instruments other than that. So
yeah,
as a practical matter,
you just have to. So I agree. You have no choice but to be confident in these things. But so again, there's a separate issue. One issue is you have no choice. I have to believe, for example, that I have freedom. I can't if believe I don't have freedom. Well, so what? I can't do anything. I have to believe that my brain's functioning properly. I have to believe that, the law of induction works. I have to believe laws of logic are real. Okay, I can't not do those things. But in the back of my mind, I can also still reserve and say, but I could be totally wrong. I have no reason to think any of those things. I can't help it, but there's no real justification on my worldview. And I'm saying, but you know what? A different worldview can give you justification for those things. Anyway, so I want to move
so I
on
guess
because
I don't argue that, like, because I was a Christian for a long, long time, and I get that those things are consistent with Christianity.
Yeah.
But I also think they're consistent if they're equally consistent with the other worldview. I guess I don't see where this becomes an argument for God if you don't already believe in God.
So what I would say is I'm not arguing they're inconsistent. I'm arguing that confidence is inconsistent. So I can confidently say laws of logic are real. My sense experiences are real. I think, of course, we can always hallucinate, but I'm just saying that in general, I can be confident. Well, God created the universe. God gave us minds. We can trust in them. We can trust in evidence. I can be confident as a Christian. As an atheist, I'm not saying you're inconsistent. I'm just saying you're confident. If you have any confidence, that's inconsistent. If I were an atheist, I would not be confident. I'd be like,
so that's interesting, because one of the things I needed to come to grips with when I left theism was embracing the I don't know. The confidence I had as a Christian, I'm not going to deny it. That was very comforting.
Yeah.
It was very comforting to go to sleep knowing that there was a protector and all that kind of thing. And yeah, you identified something that if you become an atheist, your confidence in a lot of things has to go down.
Well, except
but that of course isn't related though to truth, right? Because knowledge, there's philosophical knowledge, and that relates to how confident you are. But epistemic knowledge, justified true belief, doesn't care if you're confident. My dog can know there's food in her dish without having any justification, like justified, but without having some kind of epistemic structure around it that works.
So all I'm saying is that confidence, it's not just about like, well, I feel like there's a God protecting me. I'm saying it's deeper than that. It's like I can't even trust whether I understand logic properly. I understand whether evidence is real. That kind of confidence is much deeper than just maybe God doesn't exist. It's confidence that I can't trust anything confidently about any of my experiences being true. Anyway.
So have I pinpointed you to say that your argument is about emotions?
No. I would say the justification for premise 1 and 2 are, I would say, I would agree that they rely heavily on intuition, meaning we just have this innate knowledge that there's a moral realm. I would affirm that. But again, as an atheist, I would agree that you'd go, I'm skeptical of intuition. Well, okay, I agree you should be, but you should go much farther than I'm skeptical of a moral realm existing. I'm skeptical of logic existing. I'm skeptical of evidence being reliable. I'm skeptical of all these things. You have to go, if you're going to really be skeptical of intuition, then go all the way, man.
But it feels like if I were on opposite sides of a court case, and I was arguing that my client is innocent, and you're arguing, but what can we know really? Like, it feels like we're not arguing the same thing. Like, for me, this drive to seek truth is fully explainable through evolution, right? Like, I don't see that it needs anything beyond that, except for how do we know anything at all? But if we're not worried about the how to, then why even argue about knowledge, and why even argue about morality? Then you should just be arguing about this epistemic conundrum at the smallest or largest level. I guess I don't even know how to describe it that way.
Yeah, I think.
But when you're,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think some Christians do that and point out that, look, the atheist has no justification for being confident in any of the most basic operations of his brain. Nothing. And so they want to take you right back to the start and say, I'm not going to even grant you modus tollens or modus ponens, none of that. I'm not going to get you any logic, laws, or anything. You have to explain why you even want to engage in logical reasoning, because on your worldview it makes no sense. You can't be confident that your brain's telling you the truth. But I'm not doing that. I'm even, so this is only prompted by the fact that you're skeptical of intuition. I'm saying, hey, let's not be skeptical.
But when I'm trying to pinpoint you, like, I'm trying to come alongside you, man. I'm trying to figure out how can I get to the point where I see a shortcoming in knowledge and morality from an evolutionary perspective.
Okay, let me put it this way: if I am pushed logically into a position where, to be consistent, I have to lose all confidence even in my ability to parse logical arguments, then almost, and I can say, well, that's right. I can't even be confident that I can understand this argument properly. I have no confidence in that. Well, then, but why are we even having a conversation? I would say, wait a minute, something's gone wrong. Maybe I need to rethink my, like you said, presuppositions about reality. If I am
But I
going
could
to
say
have
this. I
any
could
kind
just substitute eating a sandwich for what you just said. Like, if I can't be confident of all of these things, why would I eat the sandwich? Like, it's just, well, I need
so
the
okay,
sandwich is here.
we'll get to this too. So you a couple of times. So I would say that because we live in God's universe, the reason you have people running around, or a few French philosophers run around just completely pulling their hair out and being like, I can't live, I might as well kill myself. But most of us just eat sandwiches and go about our day, and even have conversations like this one about God. Why? Because we're living God's universe, and we do have brains that function like mostly like God intended. They can understand logic, and so we just write that all off and like, I'm going to enjoy life and love my kids and love my wife and have a good satisfying job. But all of that is predicated on us not really pulling back the layers of our worldview and asking what's going on. So that's why you say, well, why? I just throw my hands
And
and
yeah,
not,
and
not
I guess
just die.
so. I feel like I think we're gonna have. I want to be respectful for your time, so I do think I
Mhm.
got to wrap it up. So we can get some of the questions that were asked as well. But I kind of feel like I have pulled back those layers,
Mhm.
and I don't. I think I've pulled back. I think that we would all agree. Eventually, you landed a brute fact, right? Like, you can't have infinite regression of pulling back the layers on these
Mhm.
things. For you, that brute fact is, oh, there's a God, and that explains it all. And I don't argue that if there was a God, that it would perfectly explain it. I think having a God explains everything. That's part of the problem. There's not a falsification factor there. But I guess I just landed at the point where I pulled back the layers. I see evolutionary biology, and I see that we're a social species, and that the flourishing and the lack of suffering, for me, justifies it, explain it. So I leave it to everyone in the audience, I guess. Am I missing a few layers, or have I Occam razor this to the right level? Like, that's where we're at.
I wanted to say one more thing. I'll take questions definitely.
Please,
I don't
this
want to
is
dismiss this.
it's your time, so you use it as you wish.
This is great, Paul. I really appreciate you having me on. The one thing I wanted to point out, remember, so at one point, Sean said, it's on the atheist to explain to why they reject these premises, and you immediately said, no, time out. It's not on the atheist to explain why they reject these premises. The burden of proof is on Neil because he's
Yes.
made these claims, and therefore he
Yes.
bears the burden of proof to either not prove, but to defend them, to justify them.
Yeah.
And I agree. The person making the positive claim is the one who bears the burden of proof to at least attempt to justify the claim. And again, I do that through appealing to intuition, to showing you that, and implicitly, I'd say most skeptics implicitly do value truth and care a lot about it. And then, and from my perspective, that's because they're encountering the same moral universe that we are. Anyway, the only thing I wanted to add, though, is that you actually also bear a burden of proof because you made a positive claim numerous times. I'm not find these. You said, oh yeah, you object that nothing is unconditionally obligatory or intrinsically valuable. You said we have no such obligation to seek the truth. You said truth seeking has instrumental value, not intrinsic value. I would never say that you ought to do anything without a qualifier. So you like 6 or 7 times say, nothing is, but that's a positive claim. So I only just want to throw that out there that you have to defend that positive claim. You can't just say, no, you're, by the way, you're fully justified in saying you've not convinced me of premise 2. So you can remain skeptical about the conclusion. Totally okay. What you can't do is say, no. Truth seeking is not intrinsically good. That's a positive claim, even though it's framed as a negative. But
I'm going to take this critique on board. You are completely correct about how I phrase that, and that if I want to take on such statements, you're absolutely right. I do need to take on the burden of proof.
That's not a gotcha,
right.
by the way. It's not a gotcha. I'm just pointing it
out.
No,
it's not. I appreciate this critique because I want to be careful in how I say these things.
Yeah.
Also, I think we both agree. I think I appreciate you've attempted to steelman my case, which I greatly appreciate, and that's the way to get these things. And now I need to sit back and think about whether I can make that positive claim, or do I have to back down? And if I have to back down, where does that leave me in terms of assessing your argument? That's a good one. I would say, oh, I left. I took it off. I do think we both agree that you have yet to convince me of premise two.
Yeah,
I
sure.
remain unconvinced that that the knowledge is intrinsically valuable, and that there are such things as objective morals. I think that only that there's no ought without an is. There's no ought without a goal. There's no just oughts just floating around out there without agreeing first. So should we go to questions, and then I will absolutely give you the last word in order to, if you think of anything that you want to add. Have you said what you hope to say on the 8 points?
There's tons more, but I have, like I said, I have notes on all this stuff, so I can just post them if one of your followers want to go to my website. I'll send it to you personally, and that way you can look at it, and it just has all of the
I'll
stuff.
Definitely, I will happily attach links to that. Either if it's not on one of your blogs, I can post it somewhere, and we'll put the. If you're watching this on replay, look in the description, and there will be a link to where those notes
I took
go.
this here. I didn't just waltz in here being like, "Oh, I'm just gonna." I spent some time preparing. So.
You did, and that's why I want to make sure that you got every chance to say what you want to say.
No, it's fine. And if you want to have me back talk about other parts of the book, that's fine. I
will.
Well,
now I definitely want to talk to you about resurrection, because.
Well, I will warn you. I am not. You'd be better off having a New Testament scholar on about that. I'm not.
Okay.
I've thought about some things, a lot of other things.
You said you kind of adopt William Lane Craig's philosophy.
That's right. Yeah. So I think, and I didn't follow him slavishly. If you look at I've done my own research and stuff, but I definitely am not going to claim to be an expert in New Testament studies.
Okay, so you don't want to have a fist fight about empty tombs. I get you. Okay.
But if you have anything else that you want to just run by me about my book, I'd be happy to,
Okay. Well, this is great. And actually, for some reason you'd escape my radar, but now you're everywhere. Now I look everywhere and Neil's there. So I'm excited about looking at more of your stuff. Let's go with some questions, and then we will see if that leads us to a satisfactory end to our time. I don't know if I can see them on here. I'm just going to read them without bringing them up on screen.
Sure.
So Hedda Elizabeth wrote, Paul, I grew up in a fundamentalist household. You never knew it, but you made my deconversion easier, and I love listening to your well thought and very educated opinions. Thank you. Well, thank you, Hedda. That's less of a question. So Neil probably disagrees with you, but I appreciate the confidence. Quinn F writes, gravity is fake. It's buoyancy or density, whatever flat earthers say. Sorry, I had to say it. Again, so not so much a question, but thank you for the super chat, Quinn. NDH Films write, if humans did not have a general tendency towards morality, our species would not have lasted long, and we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is actually one of the things I mentioned in my my notes. But Paul, you often said that this tendency to be, it's called pro-social behavior, to not murder everybody around you. That's hardwired into us, and actually, C.S. Lewis himself brings up this objection in Mere Christianity. It's an old objection that, well, we have these instincts to be more, quote unquote, moral. That's where morality comes from. One of the points, and there are other objections to that, but one of the things I would just say is, let's grant that these are just hardwired. There are instincts that we have to act a certain way. Well, there's lots of instincts that we have that are hardwired into us. So, for example, babies learn pretty rapidly to be afraid of heights or loud noises, just hardwired into you. So, and a lot of people grow up, being afraid of heights. They never bother. They're like, okay, I'm afraid of heights. It's one of my things. But if we encounter, I think we realize that fear of heights, it's innate, it's hardwired. If it's frustrating our goals and desires, you don't just acquiesce. So, for example, if I fall in love with a woman who lives in a 30th floor apartment, I'm not like, well, too bad that didn't work out because I can't go up the stairs because I'm afraid of heights. I work to desensitize myself and to get around that hard. And I can do that. I can, as a human being, I can use my agency to do cognitive behavioral therapy, to think myself out of these irrational fears. And so we have the capacity to transcend our programming, whatever it is, or instincts. But then the question is, well, why then don't you? So here's the question: when it comes to morality, It's in my book actually, Paul, in chapter, I think it's in chapter
Yep.
5 also. Yeah. But
I'm
yeah,
ready.
there are examples where you're right. But why don't you do more to transcend those hardwired instincts you have? Like you can't just appeal to them. Well, I can't control these things. Yes, you can. You can control all kinds of instincts you have. And so if you really believe that morality is just this instinctual, hardwired thing you have, well, transcend it when it interferes with your goals. And that's one of the questions I actually had is, well, how do you choose your goals? Pick whatever goal you want. If you're happiest living a nice moral life, go for it. If you're happiest conquering the world and just destroying civilization, well, that's good. That's a goal that you have. But don't pawn off responsibility to I couldn't help it. It's my genes. We're human beings. We have the freedom to go beyond what we're hardwired to do.
So, do you not think that humans in general desensitize themselves to their consciences?
I do. Yeah, that's what the Bible calls
So, in
sin.
exactly the same way, someone who's naturally afraid of heights desensitizes themselves to that instinct. Do we not desensitize ourselves to our moral instincts in the same way?
Absolutely. And then this is actually,
So,
if you look
so
at
is that not then consistent with these are just things that are survival heuristics that are hardwired into us that we can overcome when necessary?
again, it's consistent, but it's also I just don't explain it that way. So, for example, it's like saying because I don't ground morality in our instincts. If morality is grounded, if I would argue morality is just grounded in your instincts, well, no, they can't be objective then because you can change your instincts. I agree, that's a good argument. That's why I don't
Right,
ground
and
it there.
well, you and I don't think that any of these are objective. So whenever you say, well, then it can't be objective, I'm just going to nod my head and say, yeah.
Yeah, but that's why I ground it in another objective source, which is again
Mm.
God's character. And so, but actually, if you look at, you say, well, isn't it consistent with natural science? It's also consistent with Romans chapter 1, where Paul says the problem with us is we know what's good and we suppress the truth and unrighteousness. That we daily dull our consciences to do things that we want to do, even though we know they're wrong. That's our problem. That's why we need salvation. So again, there are two ways to look at it, and you have to ask which of these worldviews is giving us a proper, correct view of this. We all agree that we can dull, and we do dull our consciences. Why? What does that mean?
Right. It just seemed funny to me that you immediately gave an example that I think brings it closer to my worldview than to your worldview, but that's okay. That's okay. I think we're both nodding in agreement that we are behaving consistently with our worldviews at this point.
Hmm.
All right. Well, so excellent question. Christian Alexander writes, I think the gravity analogy is poor. I have a friend who doesn't believe in gravity, and he just explains phenomena differently. Just like atheists see morality very differently, but are still moral. Thoughts?
But okay, so they're experiencing a phenomenon. We're both running into something. We're calling it gravity and we're explaining it different. Why I agree with that. We are explaining this thing that we both see in different ways. The gravity denier and the gravity believer both encounter gravity and both explain it in different ways. One guy says, oh, it's not gravity. It's, what did the guy say? Buoyancy. It's sure.
Yeah,
It's not gravity, it's buoyancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they're both encountering a thing out there. And in the same way, I'm arguing that atheists, Christians, Buddhists, agnostics all encounter a moral realm of good and evil, ought and right and wrong. But then some of us have the resources to explain it, and others of us don't. In the same way, like
some of us then have to realize some of us just have the tools to equip to say, well, it's not really an ought. Our goal is so pervasive that we forget that we actually had to agree to it in the first place just because it's assumed.
Right.
But I digress. Limited Light writes, he's wrong again. I assume they mean about me.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It could be me. I don't know.
People care for others' children as well. I don't know which of us was wrong about that. But
I don't know. I do actually treat the issue of kin altruism in the book. If you've gotten to that, chapter 6. Well, Paul has the
I've
book.
only read chapter 5. I'm embarrassed to say so, but I will.
Chapter 6 is a section on group selection and kin altruism. So it's probably a footnote, to be honest. It's kind of technical,
but I do intend to fully finish this book because I do recommend it for, like, So you and I agreed on something, and I don't want to press your feet to the fire, but you agreed that handing someone a J. Warner Wallace or a Lee Strobel book can be met rightly or wrongly with some eye rolls
Oh yeah, yeah.
because because of the nature of the scholarship of those books. And I think you and I agree with that. We would disagree with, I think you would agree with their conclusions in general, but you might say this is not the most academic way to get from A to B.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
I would clarify. I think in the interview I did say this. It's not the if you look at who they're citing in their sources and who they're interviewing, these are scholars. And Tribble's a journalist, Warner Wallace is a detective, but they're drawing on scholarship, but they're presenting it in a very accessible way. And so the illustration I used with Frank Turek was a good one. I like Cold Case Christianity, which is J. Warner Wallace's book. I actually liked the book. I think it's good. It has a lot of really good points and facts in it and arguments, but it's got hand-drawn illustrations. And my point was, it doesn't matter. The book could be okay. Here's another good example. I have a book on critical theory behind me on the shelf, and I think it's really insightful. It's called Introducing Critical Theory by Simon Van Loon, but I kid you not, it's basically a graphic novel. And whenever I cite it, I kind of cringe because I'm like, it's such a good book. But if people ever catch me citing it and realize it's like a graphic novel, I mean, it's written by a professor of like English literature, and these are scholars that are, but the format stylistically, people are going to be like sneering at. I'm like, no, this is really excellent analysis of Gramsci and Adorno. My point is that, if I were to hand J. Warner Wallace's book to a Nobel laureate and say, this is, I can't, not because it's a bad book, because they're going to just look at it and be like, it's got cartoons in it. So that's my point. I'm not, and there are definitely things that they say that I disagree with, but my point is, I think overall the content's good, but it's the style, the approach. It's written for a very accessible audience. I wanted to make my book a little bit more like, it's got footnotes, no drawings.
Yeah. And so I heard you say that before I saw your book, and I just wanted to affirm that I would agree with that assessment, that your book, if someone wants to take this a little bit more seriously, that your book deals with it.
Look at that.
Look
at that typesetting. Like,
stylistically,
I wanted a clean format. Anyway, I'm just joking. But yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not like disparaging Wallace or
I am, but I'm hypocritical when I do so, because my main channel, I'm a cartoon.
That's fair. Right.
And I am packaging that in the most easily dismissed package there ever could be. So I appreciate you looking beyond the cartoon puppet and taking my words seriously and taking notes on them, because that is a compliment. So I thank you for doing so. All right. And I think we have one last question here. Neil, one, is morality objective? I guess that's the first part of the question. You nod your head yes.
Yeah.
2, if yes, why are there multiple morality systems? You do address this in your book.
Yeah, some are wrong. Yeah. And it's like saying, if science is objective, then why are there multiple scientific theories that are general relativity theory and quantum mechanics are contradictory? So is that science not objective? And the answer is, well, one of them is either wrong or incomplete. We don't just throw up our hands and say, well, it's all just garbage. Well, no, it's right. There is a truth out there, but this one theory might not be consistent with it.
I get why Vishanti, who asked the question here, that is something as a non-Christian we kind of observe, is that a lot of times it's pointed to this intuition of like, is it wrong to torture babies for fun? But if you stray further past that, then our intuitions start to stray. So for some of us, it does kind of seem like, how solid is this notion that this common intuition should lead us to this larger conclusion? So I get the question. I think you gave the same answer I would give, frankly. So and then number 3. Go ahead.
I was going to say that in C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, he has an appendix where he lists what he calls the Tao, but basically just goes through all these cultures and throughout history and just points out how similar the moral injunctions are across culture, across religions. Now, of course, there are differences. I'm not pretending they're not, but there is this incredible consensus. Now, of course, you could say, well, that's because if we didn't obey these rules, we'd all kill each other. Okay, but I'm just pointing out there is a lot more consensus than you often realize. And Steven Pinker is an atheist. Appendix of his book, great book, The Blank Slate's a great book. I quote it extensively, but he has an appendix where he lists, again, like 120 human universals, everything from like division of labor to I don't remember what else, but good and evil, right and wrong distinguished, rape prohibited. Anyway, so there is a, what he argues as an atheist, a complex human nature that we all just have, which includes notions of right and wrong.
Right. And then, and as you said, yes, I think, then just the question is, how does that get grounded? So,
Sure.
But yeah, I agree with your observation. Number 3, why do you use truth as a theological instead of reality-based sense? Former is subjective. I'm not sure you do that. You think you use truth in a theological sense?
No. I mean, again, this is a good example, though, actually, of how we can both describe. We can both say, well, truth is this thing. We can talk about true propositions. But then again, what is that grounded in? And I'd say, well, all truth is grounded in God's creation. We talk about even scientific truths, but where do they come from? Well, it comes from a God who created nature. But again, we're not, when the atheist and the Christian are talking about just truths like, well, there's a cat in my living room. We both know what truth is. It corresponds to reality. The question is, what is reality? It's God's reality. So I
feel like we're closer on truth than on morals, though.
Yeah, we could be. But in both cases, we agree on there's this thing, we can name it, but then, well, what explains it? Where's it coming from? What's it grounded in? That's where we differ. But I don't, in this argument and in general, I don't anywhere that I can remember appeal to truth as a theological thing. Of course, I think it is ultimately theological, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there may be, we're thinking in terms of seeking truth. I'm just trying to be charitable to see if I can think of a way that you were, but I think I would have to agree with you, having read your work, that you think truth is here. I think
it's truth seeking that I'm arguing is a theological.
Yeah,
exactly. It's a command of God. That's where I'm saying I'm placing the theological aspect of saying, well, in the obligation to seek the truth, that comes from God's commands. Yeah.
Right. And so one last thing, because I think we didn't quite get to it. It was one of my 8 points, was how do you differentiate between truths that we are obligated morally to seek and truths that we are not morally obligated to seek? How can we draw that line?
The answer, so how can we draw that line? I just pointed out that, like, even if I were to just I have no idea, well, the argument would still stand. You could still ask the question, but it's like the argument's independent of what truths we're obligated to seek. If actually you even agreed, if there's even one truth of any kind that we're obligated to seek, this argument works. You agreed with that. Sean said that. And he said,
I do agree with that. I just don't agree that there is one.
Right. Yeah, no, of course. But my point is just that I don't have to, that question's a good one, but it's not really going to undermine the argument. The reason I make a distinction between truth being intrinsically good and truth seeking being obligatory, it's the same distinction that theologians, actually, ethicists, make between some things, qualities being objective moral values that are good, and other things being obligations. A simple example is this: it's good to be a doctor, it's good to be a teacher, it's good to be a scientist. But no one's obligated to be a doctor. If you say, well, I'm going to be a teacher, and said, no, you've violated your moral obligation to be a doctor. No, because there's a distinction between what is good and what is obligatory. In the same way, some truths, it's good to know all kinds of truths. It's good to know, I don't know how many books I have on my shelf. It's good to know where I live. But I'm not obligated to know, where does Paul live? Or you're violating your obligation to know where Paul lives. No, I'm not. So the reason we have distinctions is because it's obvious that all truths, all knowledge is good, but we're not obligated to know every single fact in the universe. But no one thinks that's nonsense. In the same way, there are many occupations that are good, but we're not obligated to be every occupation like doctor, lawyer, scientist, teacher.
Right. But you go one step and say that there is one obligation that we're obligated. There is one piece of knowledge we're obligated to know.
That was one other thing. If you listen to the interview, again, I can see why you made a mistake. So I said we're obligated to know the answers to seek the truth of the big questions in life, and I list several. Now, the ones I listed all have to do with God. That's true. I said, does God exist? Does he have a will for my life? Does he have a purpose for my life? But then in the book, one of the truths I name in the book would be like, is atheism true? Which is also a big question. And so it's just there, or I could frame all those questions without referencing God. I could say things like, the question is, do we have any moral obligations? Right. And I could be an atheist. I could say, as an atheist, you're obligated to know if God exists. Why? Because he doesn't. And if you labor under the false belief he does exist, you'll waste your time trying to go to heaven when you should be working on easing suffering now. So as an atheist, I could argue you're obligated to know whether God exists and answer the
but
negative.
that's not an obligation, because again, that's me saying if you care about having a good life, but you're not obligated to care if you have a good life, your life will be better if you know the answer to this question.
Right. So I'm saying, as an atheist who is a moral realist like Sam Harris, not you. I agree. You would say no, but I'm saying an atheist could say I believe, as an atheist, you're obligated to rule out God as an possibility, because that will prevent you from doing the good work of promoting human flourishing. So my only point is that, like, I didn't actually name just one truth, and also all those truths you could frame them as atheistic, without reference to God.
But I also, like, I don't see how you can frame the question of, are you an atheist, without making it God related.
Well, no, like I said, atheists. So Derek Parfit, Eric Weilenberger, Sam Harris, to some extent, he kind of waffles. But they're I actually asked the guy who's the host of the Real Atheology podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, I believe in moral obligations." And he named other philosophers like Parfit and.
Oh, sure, yeah. Sorry, I was unclear. I meant, I don't know how you can ask the question: Is atheism true? Mm-hmm. Is a God related question.
Oh, okay. No, sure, but say, like, do I have any moral obligations? Mm-hmm. There are atheists who'd say, yes, you're obligated to answer that question. Yeah, you do have some, sure. But that's not a God-related question to them. I mean, I think it is, but they don't.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for watching us today and for listening to this conversation. I hope that everyone got something out of it. I hope I have some pebbles in my shoe now to go back and think about more.
Greg Koukl reference.
Yes, that's right. And way too much Greg Koukl in my life. And then Neil, at least you, apparently my video made you at least think some things through in one way or another. So hopefully everyone who listened to this had some new things to think about, and if not, maybe you just enjoyed a pleasant conversation, or an unpleasant conversation, as you deem it to be. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to join all of us and to clarify your thinking. I think I have a better sense of what's going on, and maybe we'll have some of these other conversations again sometime.
Great. I appreciate the Paul.
Did you have anything you wanted to say? I'll give you the last word. Did you have anything you wanted to throw in there?
No, I'll just, like I said, I'll post my my notes that I made on my website. I'll DM you on Twitter right after this. And yeah, I do think, I just would urge people to ask themselves, I think we didn't get to this. I think fundamentally the issue is that if you're looking for the freedom to do whatever you want, to have whatever desires you want, to seek the good as you see the good, and to pursue your desires, and anything is good if it helps me. If you want that kind of freedom, well, Christianity is going to be a horror to you. It's the one thing you have to give up. You have to say that actually God is ultimately good, and he determines what's good, and I have no say in that. This is the fundamental temptation in Genesis 3, is that human beings wanted to define their own good and evil. And I'm saying, if that's your fundamental motivation, I want to define what's good and bad according to my desires and goals, Christianity is not good to you. But we have to give that up if we're going to become a Christian. That's what I'd close with.
Okay. Well, I promise we'll give you the last word, so I will let that stand.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Later.